All right, so by now you guys should have the aim in your notebooks exactly as it's written here, including the number 2.13. And by the end of this class, you should be able to answer this question. What was the Congress of Vienna and what did it accomplish? So we've kind of gone over a lot of stuff about Napoleon. We've talked about his domestic and foreign achievements. We've explored the idea of whether or not he should be considered a hero or a tyrant. And today we're going to go over kind of the downfall of Napoleon and kind of what Europe does to pick up the pieces of kind of the mess he's made, so to speak. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So here we go. All right, so here's his defeat. I will give you guys a second, and then we will go over it. All right, so while you guys finish up, Napoleon's defeat, there's a couple of different reasons why Napoleon kind of ends up failing. And it's really not one particular thing, but it's really like, a bunch of factors kind of all coming together at the same time. Number one, unsuccessful invasion of Russia. Here's the general truth. Don't invade Russia. It's never a good idea. It goes poorly for Napoleon. It's going to go poorly for Adolf Hitler. The general idea is just don't ever invade Russia, okay? What ends up happening is that everyone who tries to invade Russia underestimates the size and climate, right, of Russia. So you think you're going to march to Moscow, and if you leave, if you depart with your army at a certain time of year, you estimate that it's going to take you X number of months to get there, fighting your way all the way to Moscow. And then when you get there, it'll be, a certain month. Well, if you underestimate the size, before you know it, you're marching through Russia in the middle of winter, and this is never going to work out well for anyone. A good chunk of his army will freeze to death, and it'll be a overall disaster. Almost the same exact thing happens to Hitler, spoiler alert. So we will get to that later in the year, but just don't invade Russia. The continental system fails. We talked last class period about the continental system and Napoleon's attempt to kind of, isolate England economically, and then hoping that society will kind of erode from within due to economic difficulty. That failed, so that's another thing. After Russia, foreign invasion after Russia. So Napoleon fails in his conquest to kind of invade Russia, and then after that faces foreign invasion. So long story short, Napoleon tries to kind of one more rally where he tries to retake the throne after he's removed in 1815, but him and his army are defeated at Waterloo, and he's exiled for good, and that is the end of Napoleon as we know it. So Napoleon is no longer. All right, next slide. I'll give you a second here. Okay, so while you guys finish up, we'll start going over this. So we mentioned that Napoleon conquers the vast majority of Europe into the Napoleonic Empire, essentially. And when he is defeated, finally, we're left with a problem. Now, France has conquered all these places all over, from Central and Western Europe all the way towards Russia. So there's like the whole continent. So after Napoleon's defeated, they have to figure out how to pick up the pieces of what he's done. And the answer to that is what's called the Congress of Vienna. So Vienna is a city in Austria. So this Congress of Vienna is essentially a meeting of all of Europe's superpowers, and they're trying to really accomplish a couple different things. Number one, they're trying to redraw the boundaries of Europe. So when Napoleon conquered, the whole continent, it's all just French Empire. So there's no point in having these boundaries anymore that separate one place from another. So they need to reestablish the boundaries of these European countries after Napoleon's defeat. So that's one goal. The other one is, during the course of conquest, Napoleon is overthrowing governments left and right? And we saw how he was putting his friends and family on the throne of conquered places. Well, now that Napoleon has been defeated, those people are going to be removed, and they're going to restore the governments. By and large, they're going to restore the governments that were in power before Napoleon conquered. So that's kind of what they're really trying to do. And then, last but not least, they're thinking forward about how do we make sure that kind of this never happens again. So basically, they're trying to ensure that all of Europe are equal in terms of military power and just general continental strength. And the idea is that if they balance power properly, it's going to prevent any one country from getting way more powerful than the rest. And this way, Europe doesn't have to suffer through another Napoleon, even though, spoiler alert, they will. But it'll take 100 or so years for that to come to fruition. 100 years and change, but that's coming. But in the interim, they're trying to redraw the boundaries, restore old governments, and then make sure this never happens again. So those are the big three things. Okay, last slide. I'll give you a second. Okay, so in Europe, there will be this kind of new alliance. It'll be Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain. Prussia will eventually become Germany. So Prussia doesn't exist anymore. But Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Great Britain, they're going to team up to make sure that France never kind of is able to do this again. The other thing is that they're trying to prevent the spread of democratic revolutions, right? So the important thing to understand is that as Napoleon conquers, he brings with him Enlightenment ideas, right? So every place that he conquers is introduced to these new Enlightenment ideas also, okay? And ideas of the French Revolution. So as even though he is a kind of an emperor, a singular kind of all-powerful absolute style ruler, democracy is an idea that he brings with him and spreads throughout these places as he conquers them. Well, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Great Britain, those are all monarchies, the same way France used to be a monarchy. And they want to make sure that they kind of shut down these democratic revolutions and this general movement towards democracy. Those that are in power typically want to stay in power. So they are not interested in seeing democracy kind of grow into anything greater than what it has already grown into. So shutting down democracy is certainly at the forefront of their mind also.